Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of the Bonus Points podcast. I'm your host Joe Garrett, as always being joined by Ollie Guy.
Hello.
Hello Ollie, and today we are very happy because we have a special guest. We have Eric Stirpē, who, for those of you that don't know, I met him when he was a writer at Telltale Games. He is now at Remedy as the lead writer on Control 2. And we were just talking about kind of some of the other stuff you've done. Before we go into it, do you want to... This is your time to brag, Eric, if you want, or mention other things that you're proud of or fun projects that you've worked on. Let people know who you are.
Thank you first of all for the kind intro. So like you said, my name's Eric Stirpē, and I was at Telltale from like 2013 to 2018, which is where Joe and I had the pleasure of working together on the mini series of Minecraft Story Mode, and then on the season 2 Minecraft Story Mode, in which I was the lead writer. And then I left Telltale Games in 2018. A little bit before the company closed down, to move to Los Angeles, where I was a freelancer for a while. And there I got to work on a whole bunch of crazy stuff. Like I got to work on like a Frozen mobile game, and I started working as a freelancer for Fortnite, and a game called Marble Knights, and like a whole kind of some other things in there. And then during the pandemic, that whole thing, my wife and I found out that she was pregnant, and so we decided to move back across the country to Rhode Island, which is where my family was and where I was originally from. And I started working remotely on a bunch more stuff. I started working full time on Fortnite, and so I was on Fortnite for like 2.5 years or something like that. And then I was also working on a game called Multiverses that I've been the lead writer on since like 2018 or so. I feel like this has been a really rambly way of kind of talking about the stuff that I've worked on.
No, it's cool. I didn't know all of this stuff.
Yeah,
so
Fortnite I put that as my game of the year last year, so I'm a big Fortnite fan.
Well, yeah. So I worked on the Fortnite story team with a really amazing guy named Nick Blahanka, who's still there. He's the lead writer for that franchise, and we did a lot of just really weird, crazy stuff, and learned a ton about kind of that whole side of things. What was, during that whole freelance period, that was kind of a chance to sort of recover from like a lot of just really kind of, Telltale worked very quickly. And so it was nice to be not in a studio environment for a couple of years there and kind of take a break. And then finally, around, end of 2021 was kind of where I was like, all right, I think I could maybe try going back to a studio situation again. And I ended up hooking up with the guys at Remedy, that was kind of how, they were kind of like, we need a lead writer for Control 2. And this was still very much stealth mode. And, So I moved here in January 2022 here to Finland, which is where I am now. So I'm over here on this side of the pond with you guys. And I've been here I've been here like a year and change or something like that at this point. And it's been exciting and strange and hard to believe. It's so funny when, at the start of this call, Joe and I were trying to remember when the last time it was we worked together. I think it was like 2016 at this point, which is like 7 years ago, which is stupid. And
I looked up the panel we did at Minecon. Mm-hmm. I didn't want to watch the whole thing because it's always cringy watching yourself back, but I had a little look through it as well. And that was a fun time.
Well, because that was you, my wife Molly, who was a narrative designer in this series. That was me. I think it was our executive producer Kevin, and then was it Stacy and Jordan? Were those the other two on the panel?
Yeah. I
forgot we had Jordan on there too. That's so funny.
Yeah, and that was that was amazing. That whole time was that was one of my highlights from that Minecon.
Yeah, that was a wild experience. I haven't really done a whole lot of like panel type things, and so that was a very new experience for me.
we had Stacey on the Bonus Points podcast. Did you see that?
Wait, that's awesome. What game? I think I did see that she was a guest, but I don't remember what game did she do?
She did Yoshi's Island.
Oh, that's a great fit for her. That's
what we said in the episode.
I'll have to go back and check that one out. That scans.
Yeah. I'm surprised she didn't like send like, oh yeah, let's do like Gears of War or something just to throw us off. Like, wait, what? Wait, sorry, that's not what we expected. But let's before we go into the game you chose, I just want to bring up. So I suggested this. You're the only guest who suggested 5 possible games and like a lovely little summary about what each game was, which is just amazing that you did that like immediately as I messaged like, like, hey, we do this little thing, like I know you're probably really busy, would you come on? And you're immediately like, yes, absolutely, I'm free anytime, here are the games I want to do. So thanks for that. But let me read them back to you. I don't even know.
I don't even remember at this point.
Okay, so we have The Dig, which is spoiler alert, the game this podcast is going to be about. Loom, which is, of course, another LucasArts adventure game of the same sort of period. Kirby's Dream Land 2, Sonic Adventure 2, and Freedom Force.
Oh, Freedom Force. I remember that, the old PC game with the superheroes. Yeah. I remember that game.
Yeah, Freedom Force was how I got... it's funny, I actually just tweeted, I think earlier this evening, that I consider Freedom Force to be my game dev origin story, because my first baby steps into working on games was doing mods for Freedom Force, and there was a really active modding community for it, and I miss it dearly.
So did you do kind of more coding, like programming stuff in the past?
You know, I stumbled my way through. Like, I learned the amount of code that I needed to in order to do what I was trying to do. We were very big nerds on the Freedom Force message boards, and what we sort of did was we had kind of our different like guild superhero teams that we worked in to sort of focus on different things. So like, so there's like the skins, like what the characters looked like. Yeah. And so there was a whole superhero team of like of the people that did skins, and then my little superhero team did effects. So like basically like what did it look like when people used their powers, and so it was the one that required basically the least amount of artistic skill and the most sort of just need for brute force trying to make things work. And that was my first foray into kind of learning kind of how all the different parts of games fit together, like running textures go onto meshes that get attached to this, and so kind of how I got into Telltale at first was actually not even I started not on the writing team, but I started on what was called the cinematic setup team, where it was the team that it was the team that kind of assembled the like when in say The Walking Dead, you're walking around like the kitchen and there's the camera that kind of follows. Mm-hmm. There was no system to do that automatically. You had to hand kind of compose sort of the different parts of the shot, and then kind of set up and then sort of set up the very rough scripting for how to kind of make that work. And so that was a lot of the only reason I was able to do that was because of what I had learned from modding Freedom Force.
Cool, right. Well, I think what a good way to start off is I'm going to read your description that you gave to me of the dig, and then I'll hand it over Ollie to kind of. We always kind of start off by just reading like Wikipedia's summary of what the game is, and we'll see how close they match up. So you said it's a classic LucasArts adventure game from 1995, based on a story by Steven Spielberg. Gorgeous art, weird story. An absolute hot mess, and I love it. Which I think's accurate.
Yeah, it doesn't say that in the Wikipedia article, weirdly enough. Right, let's go to Wikipedia then. So they said, The Dig is a point-and-click adventure game developed by LucasArts, released in 1995 as a CD-ROM for PC and Macintosh computers. Like other LucasArts adventure games, it uses the Scum video game engine. It features full voice acting, includes voice actors Robert Patrick and Steve Blum, or Bloom, I don't know how you say it, and a digital orchestral score. And I stopped it at that because the summary was quite long, so I stopped it.
Ollie, do you want to kind of just describe what actually kind of playing the game's like, what it looks like, and how you interface with it?
So I mean, this was my first ever point and click game. My first time I've ever played one.
I don't know whether to say congratulations or I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I made you play Lost in Play. You played Lost in Play, which
I did. Sorry, this is the first point and click game I played that uses the Scum engine.
Okay.
Yeah, so I played Lost in Play on the Switch. So basically the game, you're kind of like looking at backgrounds and areas, and you control these little people, like control the characters by like clicking around the screen, and they kind of interact with what it is that you click on. And the story kind of unfolds by like, you can click on a person and then say talk to them, or you can click on an object and say pick it up, or pick it up and then examine it. And then by combining these elements together and solving puzzles and speaking to people, you kind of unveil the story. But it's very hands-off. You know, it's even more, I'd say it's more hands-off than like The Walking Dead was, which is also quite, you're almost a passenger in the dig, really, watching it play out. As long as you've got pulled on the right thread, anyway, watching it play out. But yeah, so it's from 1995, so it's pixelated. Music's great, just imagine it. But yeah, all video version, check it out.
So how old were you, Eric, when you first played this game? Roughly.
So let's see. When I first played it, I didn't play it when it first came out. I played it a year or two. I was probably about 10 years old the first time that I tried playing it. 9 or 10 years old.
Okay. were you able to complete it? Because obviously this is kind of before there was, easy access to guides or YouTube walkthroughs. Like, were you able to get to the end?
Yeah, I think I made it. I think I made it a good part of the way through. I might not have beaten it when it first came out. Or rather, I might not have beaten it the first time I played it. I feel like I put it down and then came back to it much later. The first time I remember completing it was, I think I was a freshman in high school, and so yeah, I would have been more like 13, 14. I think the first time I played it all the way through to the finish.
Okay, and then so obviously the fact that it's one of the games you wanted to choose to talk about, it obviously had some sort of impact on you. Like, do you kind of know what is it about this game that you think it's kind of worth us giving it attention in 2023?
So the thing about this game is so the reason I wanted to be a writer in the first place was because of the LucasArts adventure games. It was The Secret of Monkey Island. I played that one with my dad when I was like. And this would horrify anyone I've worked with who worked on that game, but it helped me learn how to read, and I played it with my dad, and I remember being amazed at there was a moment like he'd helped me read some of the dialogue as it was coming, because that one didn't have any voice. And I remember him like laughing to himself before reading a line, and I was like, "What's so funny?" He's like, "Oh, well, let me explain this joke to you." And it was this moment where I was like, "Oh, the words on the screen are what made him laugh. I'm going to try and learn how to make words on the screen that make people laugh."
Oh,
and so from that point on, like I was all in on LucasArts adventure game stuff. I didn't own a console. All we had was a PC for gaming, and so I didn't have access to a lot of like the platformer stuff going on right then. And so like for me, it was all about the adventure games, and I liked that the LucasArts ones were funny, and I liked that they I liked how kind of dense they were, and right around the time that you're like 9-10 years old and you're like starting to feel a little too cool for like, the stuff you liked when you were a kid. That was right when I played The Dig, and it was like, oh my God, it's a serious adventure game. It's not here trying to make jokes. It's like, it's serious and it's cool. And my cool uncle, who was like super into weird science fiction stuff, recommended it to me, and I was like, oh, if Uncle Al likes it, it's gotta be cool. But I think, so that's kind of what it means to me personally. From a historical point of view, what I think is really fascinating about it is it represents this really interesting era of LucasArts / Lucasfilm games. And this was one of the last two games released on the 2D SCUM engine, where it was this and Full Throttle both came out the same year. After this, LucasArts switched over to 3D with Grim Fandango, and then pretty promptly retired the SCUM engine. Mm-hmm. This one was interesting because it was LucasArts. This was the team at LucasArts that was trying to be very kind of cerebral and be very cinematic, so this one started as a story by Steven Spielberg for his TV show Amazing Stories that never went anywhere. We should say the story never went anywhere, not the show. The show came out, I think, 1985. But this was basically a leftover episode that didn't get made for that show. And Spielberg was super into games at the time, and his buddy George Lucas had a video game studio. He was like, maybe your guys would like to try and make this into a game, and so it was handed over to them. And promptly, over the course of like 7 or 8 years that it was made, went through so many different people trying to figure out how to crack it. The other game that I mentioned on the list was Loom, which came out a couple of years beforehand, which was at the time LucasArts' sole like kind of like very dramatic, very serious game, and that was done by this guy Brian Moriarty, who had been who in the 80s had been like a really kind of hotshot text adventure writer, and he was known for doing these very heady, very kind of like thinker, philosophy and everything text adventure games. So they got him to do Loom. Which is another one that I love it for similar reasons to The Dig, where it tries to do a lot of things that it can't quite pull off. But so he was coming off of that feeling great, and so they had him do, and so he was the first one signed up to do The Dig. Fell through a whole bunch of different people, and like just the entire sort of along the way, they were trying to figure out how to make it's like, oh, it's a game with a story by Steven Spielberg and it's at George Lucas's company. Surely we can try to make this as big of a like wide release as possible. And so they did a lot of like looking at the adventure game platform to figure out like what can we do to make this accessible to a wider audience. And so they did, for instance, like every other LucasArts adventure game has different verbs that you use to interact with the story, where it's things like, you don't just use object on object. You push object or you pull object, you talk to object, you look at object. And this game tried to do away with that because they thought it was kind of they thought it was getting in the way. And I find that really fascinating because then, fast forward 20 years, and that was exactly what Telltale was trying to do, where it's like, maybe if we get rid of the verbs for, for The Walking Dead, it'll make it more cinematic and accessible to people. And so I love looking at The Dig because in some ways it feels like this strange, like first attempt at doing what Telltale will do years later, where it's like, let's get really good voice acting. Let's get really, let's make it really cinematic. And so, what I love about it is, kind of like how anytime you're at the end of a console generation, you see games come out that are like, wow, I can't believe that this is what they're doing. But it's like, because all those developers have spent however many years working with that console. And so, so like look at like the end of the PS4 generation, you saw people figuring out how to squeeze the last bit of processing power to the PS4 to make amazing stuff. Likewise, all the developers working with Scum had spent, a decade, 15 years working with this thing, getting as much out of it as they could. And so the amount of strange stuff that's in The Dig, compared to a lot of the other LucasArts games, like, between the variety of weird different puzzles or the way you interface with things or the like using 3D graphics at times, like it's just all this stuff that's like, it's wild that it's the same engine that was making Secret of Monkey Island only 10 years earlier.
I actually read because they tried using a new engine, and then at some point in development they went back to Scum, right?
Yeah. So that was the that was I think that was the very first Brian Moriarty run trying to do it. Was they were using a new engine that they wanted to get off the ground that I think was called Grime. No, that would have been the.
I think it was called like Story something or something. It'll be in the video version. It'll be up on screen.
But yeah, see that, yeah, and so it was but it was trying to be more cinematic, be more kind of not be as jokey, and and then I think they got far enough along in development where it's like they needed to just really speed things up, and so they're like, let's go back to what we know, and just remade a ton of work.
I also saw that Steven Spielberg had some anxiety about it because it was just after Jurassic Park, so he was like, he made this like top
of the world.
Well, he made this like reasonably violent and gory film as a PG-13, and then obviously apparently the beginning of The Dig, it used to also be a little bit like violent and gory, and then he was like, we have to start again. Like, I've had so many complaints about Jurassic Park that I can't release something as a PG-13 that's going to have like. It had like a fourth character in it that like had a really sticky end and everything. They like to cut all that. Like, we can't.
Yeah, was he like melted in acid or something?
I do remember that from the behind the scenes. Yeah, just because I was looking up some of the history stuff, and there was like the one image that remains of him getting melted. And he's got like it's really gross.
But they still have like the bit where you need to cut like a character's arm off, and it's like it felt so out of place for like not even this game, but just LucasArts in general. Well, there's no other game with a scene like that.
I remember me as a 10-year-old, I was stunned by that, and then what was so funny was like my memory of it was seared in as being very gory and very shocking, and so it was very funny to replay it years later and be like, oh, it's not that bad. He kind of goes off screen and then he comes back and he's got the big crystal stuck to it instead. It's like, oh, I guess he's fine.
Did you replay it for this then?
I watched a playthrough. I think the most recent time that I replayed it myself was probably 4 or 5 years ago. Like, there was a version that got re-released on Steam or something, or I was playing with some friends. I can't remember.
Yeah, I think that's the version we played, the Steam one. So I'm interested for you, Ollie. So obviously, I've played most LucasArts games. The two that I hadn't was basically Loom and The Dig. There's probably some other ones, so it's quite cool that, because I really like the comedy ones. I'd played a demo of The Dig, so I remembered that, but it didn't start at the opening of the game. It started once you're kind of on the asteroid and walking around. So because I remember I did the demo and it all started, I was like, I don't remember any of this. Then as soon as they take the suits off and I saw the orange clothes, I was like, there's the hit of nostalgia I was waiting for. So yeah, Ollie, what was kind of your first thoughts loading up the game? Is it what you expected from this style of game?
Well, I mean, so the production value was unbelievable. Like, the voice acting was like pretty pretty good. Like, it really impressed me. The music or the soundscape, it's not really songs, it's kind of just like synthy sounds, were amazing. The animations were amazing. Pretty much everything about it was amazing, except for like actually playing it. Like, I had to use a guide to start because I was like, I don't know how to interface with this, like, because I've never played one before. So there was like, get the toolkit out, get the pig out, and I was literally like, I don't even know how to move. Like, I don't know how to do anything. It's like pressing the keys on my keyboard, and I was like, nothing seems, except for nothing seems to do anything. So I had to use a guide for like up to the bit where you're in the meteor and you're like pressing plates. I used a guide up to then. I was like, okay, I think I get it now. Yeah. And then from then on, I kind of fumbled my way for about 2 or 3 hours until I had to rely on a guide again. But like, I mean, I thought it was really... I like this game more than I thought I would, but I can see... When I was looking for a guide, it was like, don't let this be your first LucasArts game. And I was like, oh dear. Because like, it is very abstract and difficult, like to link the puzzles and be like, oh yeah, we have to do this thing to get this thing, and this doesn't always make sense. And the process of figuring that out is quite long, because he's like, I can combine these two things. I can use these two things together, like on every single object, until you kind of, and also like talking to people, it doesn't always. It seems like it's revealing something, but it's not always relevant. Like, and then the handy PDA thing was like, is it useful or not? Like, it's really useful for the first 10 minutes, and then it's not.
And I think it's maybe useful twice after that, where there's some puzzle where you need to use it or something like that. Yeah.
But generally, I think it looked great. You know, it sounded great. The story was pretty interesting. Like, I enjoyed it. That's the high level version of my experience.
I think I agree. Like, I think you maybe even kind of undersold just how obscure and ridiculous some of the puzzles are, to where like I'm like, I don't even understand how they'd expect me to get that. And sometimes not even obvious ways. Sometimes there's things like, oh, you need to like, instead of a button, instead of pressing it, you need to like hold down like the mouse on it, which has like never been a thing in any of these games before. And I'm like, oh, you know when you look up a solution to a puzzle and you're not like, oh, I can't believe I didn't work that out. And I'm like, oh, they wanted me to do that? Like, okay. Oh, yeah, I was never going to guess that.
No, I mean, there's some stuff in there that feels like it's right out of like a Kojima game, where it's like, wait, what? I had to click and then turn, and like there's a lot of weird stuff where it's like I didn't even know that was on the table, and we're 5 hours in.
Oh god, the right clicking the turtle puzzle pieces. I didn't know you could right click. So like that took me. So I was like laying them all out, and I was like, maybe if I put them in roughly where I think they need to be, it might solve itself. And then like I looked up a picture online, and I was like, oh, they're all rotating.
How do you even do that?
Yeah, how do I even do that?
Like there were times where I was looking up a guide for like a solution, and I was struggling to solve the solution while still using the guide. Yeah. And there were times where the guide would say, oh, you need to do this, this, and this. And I'm like, well, I don't just want to like, follow directions. I want to understand what the solution was. And I'm like, even knowing what I end up needing to do, I still don't get why that makes sense in this world.
Well, I think it's so funny, right? Because it's like, clearly some of the designers were trying to capture that feeling of like, you're on an alien world, you're trying to understand their machines, like, and their stuff isn't meant to be used by humans. And it's like, the game can, it kind of feels that way playing it too, where it's like things like the like where you need to reattach the lens like inside the reactor, and you have to do that crazy like blue green red blue red, and like I remember as a kid just spending like hours trying to get that right, and it was just never ever right.
The interface for that bit of the amount of colors you can put in is like 100, and you need to put in like 7. Like you just need to press play or whatever.
They give you so like I remember there were times where I was like, I for some reason had it in my head that I had to fill the entire thing. And so I think the very first time I ever beat that puzzle, I used all 100, where I just had it like I had the thing basically kill time and then finally get all the way back again to reattach the lens. And I was like, this is so weird. Why is it having me do this? And then then finally I figured out, oh no, I could have just done like whatever it is. It's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then put it back.
Yeah. The big puzzle that I got stuck on. Actually, no. First of all, like comparatively to other LucasArts games, like how obscure is this?
Very I think it's funny, when talking about this one being like one of the only dramas, a lot of the LucasArts games, like there'll be times where there are ridiculous puzzles, but they hide it, but they basically put it inside of a joke. Right, and so like a lot of the LucasArts games you can kind of solve by like, okay, here's my inventory. What would be kind of a funny answer here? And so it'll be things like, like in Monkey Island, there's like you need to convince people that you can be part of their like acrobat crew and like be launched out of a cannon, but you don't have a helmet. So you steal someone's soup pot instead and use a soup pot, and so like and as your helmet, and like that's kind of the logic that those live in, where it's like it's very rooted in usually giving things to people where they're like, I'm like, that like I want some food that'll really stick to my ribs, and so you put glue, so you put glue on some breakfast cereal or something.
The famous one's the monkey wrench, where
that's the one I know.
You need to use it. Yeah, which because
where you
monkey
literally
wrench
shape
isn't
a monkey.
Well, it's not a term like outside of America, so like we don't know what a monkey wrench is, so you have no chance of working it out.
That's really funny.
But yeah, the puzzle on this that I was the one that I gave up on and just solidly relied on a guide was I caught. There's a bit we have to catch a little alien critter in a trap, and I caught him, but I couldn't get him out of the trap because it was like, oh, he'll get away. And you had to put and I was like, I have no idea what to do here. I have absolutely no clue. And I looked up a guide and it was like, you've got to put the bracelet on him. And I was like, okay, well, first of all, why would I do that? And two, I don't have the bracelet. So then I was like, how do I get the bracelet? So I had to look up another, go backwards. And I was like, I have to rely on a guide from now on because I've obviously missed something.
Well, the thing that's so interesting about that puzzle and that, adventure games kind of lived and died on their, I'm sure everyone has different terms for them, but one of the guys that I worked with who worked on a lot of LucasArts stuff, he referred to them as hinting lines, where it's sort of this idea of like, you're doing something with an element of a puzzle that isn't correct, but if you're not doing it correctly, or you're not using the correct elements. And so the hinting line, the most famous one is always, I can't use these two things together, or that doesn't fit in there. Like, these are all sorts of hinting lines where it's like, by saying like, oh, that doesn't fit in there, that tells me, oh, I need to find something that does fit in there. And I think like that thing with the rat is such a great example of a hinting line that sends you off on the wrong foot entirely, because it's like, I think the hinting line for that is something like, he'll get away if I lift the trap.
That's what he says.
And it's like, so you think like, oh, I guess I need to figure out how to stop him from getting away. When in truth, that rat is for, that puzzle where it's like, you need to let it get away so that you can find where it hid the thing. And it's like, that's such a great example of like the hinting line for that would have been better if it was something like, if I let him get away now, I won't know where he's going.
Yeah.
And so then you're like, oh, I guess I need to figure out where he's going. But it's like, and the dig, I think is like, the dig kind of infamously had a lot of puzzles that started sort of life as one puzzle and then kind of got reconfigured to be a different puzzle very late in development. And I think that's one of those great examples where it's like you sort of see like, oh, like I wonder if this puzzle was there a version of this puzzle where you had to like pick up the rat and then put the bracelet on it in your inventory or something.
Yeah. Also the bracelet and the device that you use to track the bracelet, I got to there without picking either of those things up. So even then I wouldn't have known. I didn't have them on me. And then the device was like in a rock colored chest. That like I'd literally have to trace the screen with the crosshair to find like, oh, there's a chest there. Like
that's like inside the spaceship from like the very beginning, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah. I think that's and that's so often with that. There's times when like there was in the section they call like the museum. And then you walk to a bit where Maggie is. I didn't even realize that was a door. Like for ages, I just didn't go in there and there's so many times where there's a bit when there was like a dowel on the floor and I couldn't see it. Like the art is beautiful, but they really focused on it being beautiful rather than it being clear. I would love it as my wallpaper for like my computer, but as like for gameplay, it's kind of tough.
Well, also as an aside, I love how often that game will be like, "Welcome to the library," or like they're like, "Oh, this is this is like the museum," and it's like this is like we're in a library.
You could just tell that the devs that's what they would call it, and so they just put it in the game without like any real explanation for like how they would know that that's what it is.
The mood of the game though is amazing. Like I loved the mood and like the whole story, like the dimensions and everything, and like this wise old alien. Like I loved all that. That was like I found it very compelling.
Well, and I think that's one of the other interesting things that sets it apart from the other LucasArts games is most LucasArts games are based on like a lot of talking, a lot of jokes, a lot of things being said. And so the fact that this game, so much of it is spent just you wandering around these spaces, like it's very moody and very kind of, it's like kind of creepy and sad and beautiful and haunting, I guess, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
And so I think like I would have loved to see what LucasArts would have done if they tried a couple kind of more games like this to sort of, road test it a little bit more. But yeah, it's like, the mood is, I think, one of my favorite things about it.
Yeah. I mean, right on the fifth spire, I realized that I could double click to jump to an area without
to jump between screens.
No. But like, I didn't mind watching him walk, like, because it's so, it's so well animated and it sounds so good and it looks so good. It's like, okay, well, he's gonna walk, and I guess I'm just gonna, in a Death Stranding sort of way, sit here and like soak it up as he walks around.
Yeah. Well, and like, he's got the really jaunty Boston low walk. It's all shoulders.
I'd always, when I get into a new area, I'd always be like, I'll let it walk. But then when I'm like a little bit more frustrated and like, right, what pixel did I miss? Let's skip through these. I'm like just skipping through it all like really quick.
That is.
Were there any puzzles people really liked? Any kind of standout, like, because it sounds like we all like kind of like the story and the vibe, but were there any puzzles people were like, that was really cool?
One that I think the hinting for it isn't quite right. So like I still like I still have some quibbles with how it's presented, but the puzzle where you need to pry the cover off of a control panel to then hook up a wire from the floor to it, I think is really interesting, because I think that's a great example of like you've gotten so used to interacting with these control panels as like keypads basically, and so then the first time you have to do something very different with one of them, I thought I feel like is very sort of surprising and captures that feeling of like, oh yeah, he's just brute forcing his way through this.
Yeah,
I like that one.
The puzzle, it's not really a puzzle, but like the weird little thing that I really liked was that part where the water's crashing up and you have to like jump over it at the right time, and I was like, God, I wish that was me. Like the way he like floats over. I was like, that's so lovely. But like in general, a part that I really liked was the first time you speak to the alien and you can understand him. I was literally this is amazing. This is like, I had with Half-Life Alyx the same thing where I was like, I feel like I'm seeing something that humans should not see. Where I was like, this is incredible. Like, he's just talking to us about like his life and his like race and all this amazing stuff. But those two...
I feel like, I feel like that moment captures like probably what the developers wanted the whole game to feel like. And I feel like that's probably it right there.
It's kind of a shame that stuff's so on the back end and it's all quite quick. You learn about it, then it's resolved quite quick. Obviously you're seeing kind of the ghost versions of them and that mystery, which is quite cool, but then it feels like it all kind of wraps up quite quick as soon as you learn what the actual world is about.
Yeah. Also the can we talk about the characters?
Yeah,
please.
I kind of think they're all very well acted, but they all kind of stunk and were kind of horrible, and like I didn't want to be around them or talk to them, or like they're so mean to each other all the time, like with no reprieve. Like they're hardly ever nice.
Maggie is like, that's something I hadn't remembered from when I was younger, but Maggie is so mean to Boston the whole way through. You'll be like, Maggie, I found this cool thing. And she'll be like, shut up, Boston. It's like, that was unnecessary.
Yeah. And like, so they were all very well acted, but I kind of feel like we're missing about 60% of the context of why they were all acting the way they were with each other, which is a bit weird.
And it's like, you're like, how terrible was that space shuttle ride?
Exactly. They're all packed in. Oh god, if one of them farted, they'd never talk for the rest of their lives. That would be it. They're already right on the edge. I think they try to set up a bit with saying that Maggie, like, because she's like a journalist, and it's sort of like there's a bit of should a journalist be coming with us, And I feel like she's maybe trying to really prove herself as part of the team, but like that's me really trying to give the benefit of the doubt and read in deep there and assume that's what the writers were going for, because that's all I can think of.
Yeah.
Well, and it is really funny because Boston will go back and forth wildly between feeling really dumb and then also just like way too fast at figuring certain things out. Where I think one of my favorite examples is after you do the whole puzzle where you're like rearranging the moon and the sun to trigger the eclipse, and then like you go to the place where that's important, and he like looks up at the moon that's now in an eclipse, and he's like, "It's in an eclipse. How did that happen?" And it's like, Boston, we just did that together. Like,
Joe, with the you just saying you give him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe with Eric here, I might have some backup, but basically I always like really overread game stories and voice lines. I've got a mad theory about this game.
Okay.
I think this game might be about LucasArts going from 2D to 3D, because like it was the last proper 2D game. Boston is like this guy that's like, this is the way things that I do it. This is the way that it's always been done. The place they're going to, they always call like, oh, it's polygonal. It's like geometry, and once you've seen it you can't ever go back. And the two people he's with, one of them is an expert in like this polygonal research and everything, and the other one is a journalist, which kind of says to me like,
that is so funny.
Yeah, but he's like, oh, these are the way the things were done, and then he's like, he doesn't know how to interface with anything, like he can't control it. He's like, I don't understand what I'm looking at, and he's saying to people like, you need to help me because I don't understand what I'm seeing. And I was playing it and I was thinking like, are they talking about 3D games versus 2D games?
That is very funny.
I love the theory, but the thing is this game was in development for like so long, like over 6 years, that like they were deep in 2D still. I don't know if like they were really like, they wouldn't have planned to spend so long making the game.
But it changed
and then
hands so many times that maybe during the hand changing they added, and they were like, I wish we were doing it the way we used to. And
that is, that is funny. Like, I do wonder, like, even if that wasn't done as like a conscious thing, it feels like something that could have been very much kind of like, kind of bubbling.
Are you flattering me, Eric, or do you actually believe that?
No, I mean, like, because I've had that, we would have that happen at Telltale, where it's like, during the period that things were kind of chaotic, the number of times that like stories would sneak their way in about like, trying to figure out what to do about leadership and how hard it is to make decisions under tough situations. It's like, there's a lot of that really, like, there's a lot that really snuck its way in there. And I think it's just sort of the nature of like, especially if you're on a deadline making art, like, in kind of a commercial system, like, like the video game industry, you do just kind of, you're like, I need something to put in here. I'm just going to like kind of pull from like what's inspiring me right now. And typically what's inspiring you is what's surrounding you.
Yeah.
It's also crazy how good the 3D elements fit in with the game, and there's no jarring shift of art style, like considering how early 3D that was, like it's done really well.
To this day I'm still amazed by some of that stuff where it's like, the only thing is because Scum was not capable of having 3D objects in it, so it must have been 3D stuff that was either being painted over, or it was like 3D stuff that was being rendered to flat images, and then however it's done, like it's funny, those like weird, like when I was watching the playthrough most recently, something that really stuck out to me is like the light bridges, where it's like, the thing we were talking about before, it's like you click and hold. There's weirdly beautiful art on those screens where it's like the little crystal that shows up and kind of shimmers. That's like, it's very like needlessly beautiful.
They're also one of the I think the smartest design decisions, because it's basically you get a bunch of light bridges that connect to a single point, and it's just like, it's almost like fast travel at that point. It's like you've got to work through a bunch of puzzles, then you light the bridge, and it's like, okay, they're added to my network, and you can kind of really learn your way around. I think that's because it's kind of it's good and it's bad. Like, in one way, I like the fact that it's mainly set in one location, and you do get to really learn it, and you sometimes get these aha moments as like, oh, I've got this rod with this puzzle that I've been waiting to do for ages. I can go back and I know my way, which is great. But then also I think it makes the puzzles way difficult because you have so many options for areas open, talking about like Full Throttle is a game you're riding your motorbike as you're kind of going from place to place. And then once you leave a place, okay, all of that stuff doesn't matter. Don't worry about that. There wasn't a bracelet that I missed like 2 hours ago that I'm going to need. So I think it really helps for the feeling of being abandoned in a place, but then gradually kind of working it out. But it does make it harder to work everything out because you have, such a wide area that you can travel between.
Well, it's funny, like right now in the world of video game development, everyone I talk to, every team has someone on it who's like, I've been playing Elden Ring a lot, and like, and I think what we're gonna see is in like the next, 4 to 6 years, there's gonna be a lot of games that have Elden Ring elements in them, and I think this was the dig. To me, feels like a game where someone on the team was like, I think we should get Myst in here. We need to feel more like Myst.
Yeah.
And it really feels like they were trying to do like the LucasArts take on Myst in some ways. Because you think about Myst, and that's very much that, where it's like it's this really big world. You're kind of wandering around and you kind of poke at stuff occasionally to try and figure it out. And yeah, it's very much a game that feels like you're supposed to like go away and think about it and be like, oh, you know what? Maybe I should go back and try and do this.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Very different to the modern era, though, in this game, is that you carry a lot of items for a very long time. Like the wire that you find in like this third area that you use right at the end. It's like, when am I going to use this wire? I've been carrying around with it. Or the thing to cut the guy's arm off.
I've been rubbing it against everything I find. Just
Well, so one of the things that I love is I think the final project lead for that game was this guy named Dave Grossman, who I worked with for a while at Telltale, and he was like just a LucasArts legend, like deeply involved in the whole Monkey Island franchise. Sam and Max, just incredibly talented guy. He was just one of the 2 co-directors of the most recent Return to Monkey Island. They got to they got to return to Monkey Island. Yep. And there's the joke that he put in, and I feel like it must have been a coin toss of whether it was Dave or Ron. But in the very beginning of the game, you get horse armor as an item in your inventory, and it just hangs out in your inventory the entire playthrough. And
wasn't it? It was like a pre-order bonus or something, right? There was something,
right? If
you had to buy it, and they advertised it as it does nothing, but you could just get it. Like, so it really tied into like the waste your money if you want.
Yeah. But what was amazing was over the course of the game, when you would look at it as you got deeper and deeper into the game, Guybrush would say things to you like, This'll definitely come in handy soon. Or like, I'm really glad I have this. It'll definitely come in handy.
That's great. Do you keep playing point and click adventure game? Is it something that's kind of carried into your adult life? I know obviously they're not as prolific or as regularly released as back in the day.
I definitely have a harder time with them than I used to, because it's like, so much of them is rooted in like, really beating your head against a lot of the puzzles and things. Return to Monkey Island I played and loved. There's a guy named Dave Gilbert, no relation to Ron Gilbert, weirdly, but he has a company called Wadget Eye Games, and he did a game 2 or 3 years ago called Unavowed. That was a really interesting, well done point and click adventure game, where it's kind of this like it's kind of this urban fantasy thing about like investigating paranormal mysteries and stuff and like fighting demons. And he tried to basically say, what if we combined a point and click adventure game with like a BioWare game where you've got a party that you recruit and like they have different abilities and things. Really cool, really great production value. And he also through the 2000s, he had a game series he was doing called the Blackwell Legacy. That was about a spirit medium and her ghost partner who were like, again, trying to solve like paranormal mysteries and things. It all sort of takes place in the same world. So I don't play a ton of point and click stuff, but like his stuff, and then like occasionally other things, like because I do still have a great fondness for it as a genre and a format.
Yeah, I just played Lost in Play. That's on PC and Switch.
I haven't played that one.
Oh, it's good. It looks amazing. It's like all hand animated. But the thing is with that point and click game is like, you're very much in an area and everything in this area solves puzzles that are where you're standing. You're not like bringing anything between.
Right.
You're kind of like, oh, I'm in the park, so everything here will solve, everything within the park, and then I can leave.
Yeah.
I think that's a smart way of kind of trying to streamline it a little bit, because I think, I think that's something that the people have less patience for now, is feeling like they need to kind of like click around the whole world. Like, let me find anything that I haven't clicked on yet. And so I think by kind of telling people like, this is like a level, and in this level, you have everything you need. I think it's a smart way of going.
It's also a bit like
another great one.
Oh, sorry, Jay.
Ollie.
I was just going to say, like, because now YouTube guides exist, it's almost like, well, I may as well just watch it if I'm just going to follow a guide that closely. So I guess to kind of make puzzles you can just figure out is kind of better.
And have the good hint system as well, which is something that Return to Monkey Island did really well, and Lost in Play did. Kind of a tiered hint system.
Yeah,
works,
I was super impressed
really
by it. Yeah, Return to Monkey Island's hint system was really, really impressive, because like I think they did a really good job of because like sometimes to understand a puzzle, you just sort of like sometimes you just you're not even like in the same headspace as the person who made the puzzle, and so sometimes you just need a hint to be like like you might be like if there's someone guarding a locked door, you might be trying to figure out what do I need to do to impress this guy, and so you're bringing him every inventory item you can find and everything, and then the hint will be something like, I wonder if there's another way around, and it's like, oh, I was not even thinking about how to go around him. I was just trying to think about how to make him like me.
Yeah, and then it will be like, maybe try looking in this area, and then eventually it will just be like, okay, just click on this.
Please,
it's just
please.
Pass me the mouse. I'll do it. Like that. That's basically the last one.
The two dogs puzzle in the dig was pretty tough like that, where it's like there's one guard dog comes to life, and then like you can't go near you.
Yeah.
And then the solution is to bring the other one to life, because then they'll fight and it will fall down, and it's like, I would never have thought of that if I wasn't using the guide. I never ever would have thought of doing that.
Yeah, and that I think is one of those that's one of those puzzles where it's really like, on the one hand it feels like guess obvious because it's just a thing that's already in your inventory and something that's on the screen, so technically they should be obvious, but there's nothing, because there's no hint line about like I'm not going to fight that thing. If only there was something bigger that could only I could fight something its own size, you might be like, oh. But because he just stands there and goes, whoa.
Yeah.
You're like, I hear you, Boston.
It feels like there's like a lot of puzzles where the developers, they know the solution, and you can feel like they're playing through it and testing it, and they're like, okay, this makes sense, this thing goes in that there, but they're not considering all of the other things a player might attempt, which is kind of almost equally logical until you know the way that it's going to play out. Well,
the thing that's so funny too is it's like, what I would be fascinated to know is like in so often in game development that with voice acting, your recording date will be sort of a set date that you're working towards, and especially if it's a like star voice actor like Robert Patrick, they probably knew, they were like, okay, this is our last session with him. We're not getting another one because this is very expensive. And so it'll sort of be like last call at a restaurant, where like it's everybody on the team being like, here's every possible line that we might need for this character. And it's like, if you don't get it in, or if a new puzzle shows up after that, you kind of just need to make do with what you got. And it's like, I think a perfect example of that is like, again, to talk about like the planetarium puzzle, where you need to use the scepter on the light in the ceiling. And it's like, he looks up at the light in the ceiling, and there should be a hint line that's something along the lines of like, I wonder what I need to use to turn that on. Because you don't even know, because like you think it's like a light from outside, or like just a faint light illuminating the room. And when you tell him to look at it, all he does is goes, It's like that gives you nothing. I don't know if you remember from when we were working together, Joe, but we had one or two sessions where it was like, I think we were on like one of your, I think we were on your last session, and we just had you record all sorts of stuff that, like, I remember apologizing in the session where I was like, listen, I don't even know if we're going to use this, but it's just in case.
Yeah. Yeah.
Where like, I think like there was there was the whole fight between like cake or cookies, and it's like, I think that went on about 10 minutes longer in the recording session than it did in the final game.
Yeah.
Because
the recording, it was just so weird, because obviously like it was like I just had no idea really like anything. You're like you kind of set up a little bit about murder mystery and stuff, but I had no idea in terms of setting or anything. And obviously like I'm not a voice actor, so I'm just like going through reading lines. I'm like you could do anything with this. You could make me look however you want. Like you can, like, I'm just giving you like puzzle pieces. I have no idea what it's going to end up looking like. Like you put a lot of trust, I guess, in the writers and the creators, when you're doing something like this.
Well, the thing, I think, it helped because like, and like, I remember when we were kind of prepping for that, you were talking about kind of like how Stampy is very much, Stampy was very much a character that you played, you were Joe, and then there was Stampy, and like, that was something that was really useful, because, it meant that like, because like there was some stuff that we'd write where it'd be like, you're writing for someone who's just using their real name, and you're like, I don't know if I feel comfortable like that. Like there were some jokes that you'd not feel super comfortable making, versus it's like, Stampy, I think one of the reasons people really loved how that character came across in the game, I think was because, we were able to have a little bit more fun, because it wasn't you, it was your character Stampy. We could go a little bit goofier and a little bit more out there, and people, I think, really responded to that. That was all. But anyway, that was all just a tangent to sort of say, I'd be fascinated to know with the dig. Like what are the puzzles that came about after recording was done? Like what is the what is the stuff that they were like just we used to call it digging through digging through the junkyard of just like finding like lines that hadn't been used elsewhere to be like, I guess this kind of gets the intent across. And to me Boston looking at a faint light and going so feels like an example of a designer being like, what could possibly fit this?
I heard that apparently so Brink was originally meant to be with you through a lot more of the time that you're exploring, whereas in this you're mostly by yourself, and there's a time, you know, when you find these crystals that bring people back to life, he suddenly kind of shows up with you. Oh, no, you need his help to open the door. That's the way they kind of help, you know, justify him being with you then. But apparently he was meant to be a companion with you much more, but just with the AI and stuff, it turned out to be, you know, quite difficult.
I'm sure.
So I wonder if maybe he had a line about, oh, I wonder if you need to hold something up, you know, so maybe they did have the really dialogue, but, you what not the character wasn't there because he was cut from a completely different
I can hear
reason.
Brink in my mind telling me to look up and
what would Brink say?
Yeah, what would Brink? Then a thought bubble appears. It's like,
but it's something
it's just a thought bubble. Brink going, "You an idiot, Commander."
Yeah. But it is something that I am conscious of now, just even from just the tiniest little toe I dipped in with story mode. For now, when, you know, it's Ollie and me, we're here dissecting these games and saying, oh, why would the designers make the door like this? It should obviously be like that. And then you need to sometimes take a step back and go like, oh yeah, the designers know so much better than us. The reason they did it like that is obviously what I think is an obvious way to do it. They couldn't, for whatever reason that I can't fathom. Like you got to kind of remember that.
Yeah, like the number of times where it's like, you know, something will ship in a game and it's just like, oh, everyone knows it's embarrassing, but it's like any other possibility that was possible was so much worse.
Yeah, it's like, why didn't Telltale decide to make like a better game engine? Why didn't they click that button? Why they
should have just ponied up the cash for the better engine button.
Yeah, I know what they should have done. That's funny. So yeah, I guess we've kind of really spoke a lot about the puzzles. Before we think about ranking it, I guess we could talk about the overall ending of the game and kind of the story. And it was, Ollie, you've kind of had your crazy theory, but was there any kind of messages that any people got from it?
Well, I think it's really interesting with the ending, because it's like that to me feels like the most where that are like if you play any of Brian Moriarty's and I think he's got 2 text adventures, and then he's got Loom are kind of his 3 games, and his text adventures are like really, really dense with philosophical stuff. And then Loom goes into some crazy philosophical directions at the end about the nature of life and death and legacy and things. And so I think it's interesting that the ending of The Dig sort of feels like the last semblance of that, where it's like, you know, kind of talking about like, it's trying its very hardest to be like a 2001 A Space Odyssey sort of moment at the end. And it doesn't quite land it there, and because you don't quite like the characters, you know, there's not that moment of being like, and we're going home. It's like it doesn't quite land, and that's something that I had kind of forgotten from earlier playing it, where I'm like, oh, the ending kind of wraps up and is just sort of done.
It kind of feels like it does a bite-sized version of philosophical thinking and like, you know, life and death, and could you see the afterlife? Would you ever come back? But it kind of does it all in about 5 minutes. And then they're like, oh, and the center of it is this guy, Boston, who uses his shovel to do things, and the old way is always best. See you later. Cheers, everyone. Like, it kind of just ends.
Yeah.
No, I guess for 1995, that's pretty good. I guess that's pretty about as good as it got, I guess, back then.
Well, and that's one of those things too, where it's like, you just imagine, like, you know, they like, if they're, you know, I mean, it's like any sort of cutscene moment, even for an era like this, was so expensive, you know, then comparatively speaking to if you can do something in gameplay, it's always cheaper than doing it as a cutscene. And so it's like, you imagine, like, when you're talking about philosophical stuff, it's like, how do you put gameplay on sort of these kind of philosophical moments? Because, you know, like, I think, you know, I think the team that was making, you know, they like, I'm sure the version that they would have loved to do would have been something like from Death Stranding, where it's like, you know, taking an hour and a half long cutscene to get to, you know, to get to talk about life and death for a while and the afterlife. But yeah, I think it's really funny to see what they managed to squeeze in there.
Funnily enough, I actually think that cutscenes have aged pretty badly compared to the in-game. The in-game, like, the animation of pulling Maggie up onto the lift and stuff like that, like, looks really good. And then when they zoom in to show like someone's face and they're talking, it just looks like so much less detailed and weird and like really like over animated. Like, it just, I don't think it looks anywhere near as good as the in-game stuff. We have to kind of use your imagination a bit, I guess, for the in-game.
Yeah, and like I think that that's that house style for LucasArts of like how they sort of did like the one pixel for like the one color pixel for eyes, like that's something I think is really powerful, where it's like, you know, like there's some moment where it's like they want to show that Brink is like about to lunge for the crystals, so they have his eyes flash green for 1 second. And I think something like that is so powerful because it's like you said, it's like it's a little bit more making the player need to use their imaginations for what the intent was. Versus,
and then you remember the original Monkey Island games when they did close-ups. You know, they were so great. There was like real people, basically. I think they were actual real pictures, right? That they kind of scanned in.
Yeah, that they just and it just looks like something out of like almost looks like the ending shot almost looks like something from like a romance novel about pirates where they're looking out to the horizon.
Yeah,
it was like so dry. Then all the remakes they've kind of gone away from that and had more consistent cartoony style throughout.
Yeah, well, I read actually, speaking on the graphics, they gave them all the same jumpsuits because it was like so much cheaper, so they could use like the same walking animation because the bottom half, they all look identical. They're just these orange legs, because they said that in one of their previous games they made everyone have like really detailed costumes, and you kind of lost it because you couldn't see. There wasn't enough detail existing to basically be able to pick
makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Well, and it's like, especially with a game like this where like there'd be these where it's like you have the kind of deep rooms where it's like, you know, where they're going off into the distance and they're coming back, and like the ones where like Boston's going through caves and whatnot. Like, you know, the way they did that was just like shrinking it down further and further. Yeah. And it's like, you know, if you have anything more complicated than just orange, it's like what's great is you can just shrink it down. He's just orange with a little, you know, with his little head.
Yeah, he looks like the Mario Brothers map screen version of him, where he's running around.
You just need to take their word for it that that's Boston.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it worked. We say it, but you know, sometimes three pixels is enough. You know, as long as you have the context and it's moving at the pace that you would expect it. You know, your brain does do the rest.
We didn't get any questions, but we did get some comments. Which I can
on
read
the dig.
On the dig, yeah, which I can read out. So Alfie Dog on YouTube, this is quite a short one, said, love the background art in this game, but the banter between the characters fell flat in my opinion. Which I agreed with. One of my notes was like, I don't know if it's meant to be funny. Like, am I meant to be laughing or not? Like, I couldn't tell.
I legitimately can't, like, so, because I think what's so funny is if you play Full Throttle, which again came out the same year as this, Full Throttle has this fantastically done kind of slow burn, like starts as rivals then turns into a romantic thing between the two main characters, and that works really well. And I can't tell if in this game I feel like some of the people making the game thought that Maggie and Boston were going to end up together, and other people thought they were just going to hate each other forever.
Yeah, the one line that made me laugh that Boston had was like, I can't imagine where I'd be without my shovel or something, after like the 5th time of using it. And I was like, is this meant to be funny? Like, is this a comedy game? I can't tell. We've also got Mike on Discord. This is before we played, but he said, just wow. Have just seen the gameplay and the music and the scenes sound and look amazing. I'm looking forward to playing. Which I agree with. Like, when I first started playing it, my girlfriend wasn't here, and I literally cranked my computer speakers like all the way up. Nice. And they were like floating around in space. You know, where they have to like, they use the radios. They're like, oh, we're just coming in now. Like, and the way it cranks in and out, I was like, this is so cool.
Really satisfying.
Like, yeah.
They also, I don't notice it much later on, but they seem to have like the dialogue would adjust in terms of like what order do you put like the mine things down, the explosives, and it'll go like, okay, like second one's down. I was like, oh, but I could have done this one here first. So they kind of are altering what dialogue plays depending on like the order that you have done things, and that kind of stood out to me as being quite smart.
Yeah.
And it's nice too, doing that very early on is a good way of sort of showing off to the player, like look what we're doing in this one.
Yeah. And
it's almost like saying, this is your adventure, you know, like you chose to do that one first. But then, like, obviously after that, they didn't do that again. But they kind of made out of it. That's what was happening. So the last one I got is from Helen on the Discord. It's quite long, but they really like the game. So I'm going to read it out. So Helen said, I hadn't played this since the 90s, and I have no idea how I did it back then. I had to cheat this time because life is too short. I definitely had more time in the 90s. Anyway, a few thoughts. How did Maggie learn to read and speak alien so quickly? Do you think it's called the dig because the amount of times that Boston uses his shovel? The turtle puzzle and then just screaming. Brink is a cool bad guy, and that bit where Boston saws off Brink's arm, yuck. I find it very odd that this game was even made. It took so much time and money, with the result being so unlike anything unlike LucasArts adventures that you'd think it would struggle to find an audience. But with such a sci-fi pedigree, Spielberg, Robert Patrick, Orson Scott Card, I don't know who that is, as one of the writers, maybe these days it's not unusual to have famous authors, actors, and filmmakers working on a game, but back then games were definitely not seen as art. Great game for the podcast. Glad I played it again. So there you go.
That's awesome.
Someone was buzzing. Yeah.
Yeah. Orson Scott Card is a novelist who, in recent years, has had some unfortunate political activism, we'll say. And he wrote the novel Ender's Game, and so he was early 90s he was definitely on a bit of a hot streak, and so they having him come in to write. I believe he wrote in the first version of this. He wrote all the dialogue for everybody, and so it sounds like there was a lot of like in later things. Telling people not to cut lines that he had written, where it's like, we can't cut that one. That one was written by the famous guy.
Yeah, fair.
It is worth mentioning that this game was, by LucasArts standards, a success. Like when it was released, it was their best selling game they'd had. I mean, it was only, by modern standards, it sold over 300,000 copies, which doesn't sound like a lot compared to obviously big budget games today. And obviously it had a very long development time. Maybe their expectations were it was going to sell even more. But I feel like this game is obviously, I think it's kind of become more forgotten compared to, something like Monkey Island, or even kind of like Grim Fandango and Day of the Tentacle, because it has had re-releases. I feel like they're mentioned, or even Summer Max, of course. Telltale kind of carried on that legacy. Whereas The Dig, I feel like, has been a little bit forgotten, but like it wasn't a failure.
Yeah, and it's funny because it's like, both The Dig and Loom, I love for very similar reasons, because they are trying to do a lot that, maybe they shouldn't have tried, but I love that they did. And they're both also the two that I feel like have kind of struggled to kind of like, they've definitely been a bit more languishing in obscurity than the rest of them.
Yeah,
I feel like most people know Loom because of the guy in Monkey Island who's got a badge saying "Ask me about Loom." I feel like most people know Loom from that rather than actually playing Loom.
I've been talking to like my friend, my real life friends who are really into LucasArts games, and I was saying, "Oh yeah, we're doing The Dig on the podcast." And they're like, "What is that?" I'm like, "You've got like a special edition of Day of the Tentacle, like in a plastic wrap in your house. You don't know what The Dig is." Like, I thought it's just weird that this one is not that known, considering there aren't that many of them. It's not like LucasArts made hundreds of games. So.
Yeah, I mean, they like from that classic era. There's like 10.
Yeah,
I should know this off the top of my head, but but it's like, there aren't that many, and so it's the fact that there can be one of them that like people kind of forget about is pretty funny.
Yeah. Is it list time, Joe?
Unless there's I guess you can mention stuff during the list time as well. But was there anything else kind of burning that you wanted to say about the game before we we tear it down and find its home on our ever-growing list?
I mean, I think just getting the excuse to sit here and talk about The Dig at all is awesome, and it's like, because I think there is. I think the biggest thing about it is, like I said, I called it a hot mess, and I mean that as someone who, I've worked on things that I would definitely describe as being sort of hot messes, where it's like, you can tell that it was a game that was like any game is a struggle to get to come out. And it's like, it is one that so clearly had people that were trying their hardest to make something great as it was going. And it's like, it's a very special pain in game development to be like working on something where you step back and you're like, I can tell that this isn't going to be great, but I'm going to try to make my part of it really good. And I feel like that's something that you see come through in this game, where it's like, there's the beautiful, like there's some really beautiful animation in here, or like the music, or like just a really gorgeously done like waterfall and things, and it's like, there's so much in there that was clearly like done with love. And I think that's one of the reasons I was excited to get to talk about it here this evening, is it's like, I think it's such a kind of pure distillation of so many of the issues that still happen in game development to this day. And I think it's a great reminder of like, when like, especially in the modern day, when you're like struggling to get something out the door. It's like, okay, this has been the struggles going back to the earliest days of this industry.
Yeah, no, it's a great choice of game. I'm super interested. As I said, I played a little demo of it, but this was a black hole of my LucasArts games, and I'm glad to have played it. I know what it is now.
Well, and I think if you and I think if this did intrigue you at all, like Loom is like I would say Loom is the better execution of a lot of the ideas here, where they and it's like and Loom has legitimately some of the most interesting. I don't know if they're always great, but some of the most interesting puzzles I've ever played in an adventure game because they're all based in using music to weave spells and the mythology that like the Loom is one of those games where you play it and you're like, was this based on a comic book or a novel or something? Because it just feels like it has such a rich mythology when in fact it was just entirely made up whole cloth.
Yeah, no, definitely one to check out. But first, let's put the dig on the list. So where would you personally put the dig on the list if you can find a place?
If I could personally put it someplace, I mean, honestly, like somewhere around where, like looking at how you guys are doing the ranking here, somewhere around like Ratchet and Clank, Sonic 3 and Knuckles and the Beginner's Guide feels about right. Where it's like that whole part, like where it's like that kind of feels like the land of like big ideas that didn't always come out exactly correct, but a lot of heart and craftsmanship. So that feels like kind of the zone where I'd put it personally.
Okay, so that's around, for audio listeners, that's around kind of like 25, 26-ish kind of zone. Yeah. Ollie, where are you thinking?
I think I would agree. I think maybe a little bit higher than that. Probably more around BioShock area, 24, 25. 23 maybe.
Yeah, it's difficult because I feel like we always kind of come back to Ratchet and Clank, because Ratchet and Clank feels like they completely successfully did what their vision was.
Exactly what they were trying to do.
Yeah, but what their vision was a remake of an already polished game and a known quantity and lots of sequels, where the dig is so much more interesting, but it didn't pull off what it was going to do. And I feel like I have fond memories of it. Like if I think of I think of the game and I can see the colors of like orange and purple, and I hear the music. I'm playing the soundtrack quietly in the background now, and it's putting me in that mood. And it's a feel good mood. But then I remember playing it and like, oh, I needed to pick up a dowel, but it was the same color as the floor for no reason. I feel like the actual moment to moment of playing the game was like the emotion was frustrating, but I kind of forgot the frustration as soon as I finished it. So it's kind of hard to judge.
Well, yeah, and I think that's the really hard thing about trying to do any kind of like, that like, kind of do like that like I'm trying to remember what it was. So when I went to school at the University of Southern California, and in the film school there, one of the groups was the I can't remember the exact name of the major, but it was essentially media criticism. We're sort of learning how to analyze and kind of critically analyze media. And that was one of the things that got talked about a lot, where it's like, like being a critic for like film or something like that. Yeah, it isn't just about like thumbs up, thumbs down or whatever, because it gets so much more complex than that, where it's exactly what you're saying, where it's like you can execute something beautifully, but if the idea of what you were aiming for was only mediocre, it's like, then is that mediocre or is that beautiful? And it's like, so I think, the dig is such a great example of, it's like they were aiming for something big and they achieved interesting.
Yeah. But I mean, it's kind of we know kind of the whole system of this list is in a way kind of flawed, but it's kind of like, we love having the weird debates. Like if you look at like number 9 and 10, where it's Undertale against Yoshi's Island, where it's like there couldn't be totally more difficult, different games, but then we have to try and put one above the others. It's like an impossible task, but it's just kind of like a fun theoretical thing to do.
And then and I love like the original Doom up against Walking Dead season 1. Like that's very funny.
Well, Doom was a bit of a contention point, because I think it should be higher, because I'm like, every game that came after Doom is Doom, whereas Joe is like, oh yeah, but it's not. He thinks I'm mad, and basically he chained it to Prey. He chained it to Prey because he was like, it can stay up high, but it can never be above Prey. So that's why they're
Prey's one of my favorite games of all time, and Ollie keeps trying to put it down, and so I had to.
That's so funny.
Prey is a game that is like lots of great ideas, looks really nice, but the execution is not always there. That's
See,
my
I
problem with it.
argue that your execution as a player was the problem. You just
I had to play it on easy.
Well, so I worked for a while with the guy who directed Prey. He did that game. He did that game Weird West that came out last year or the year before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I worked with him as a writer for a little while, and yeah, he was a fascinating guy. Where it's like to him the player's skill was kind of a thing that to him would or would impact the kind of story or impact the game, and it was like. When you ask him, like, well, what do you mean by player skill? He's like, being able to sort of look at how the game wants, like basically being able to like look at how does the game want to be played and figuring out kind of how do you fit in to that.
Yeah, if you play it as a first-person shooter, you're going to be like, oh, it's not a great first-person shooter. But if you're trying to be creative and play with the systems and the physics and stuff, then it's like, oh, this is an amazing sandbox and a really cool world to mess around in.
Well, and it's funny because like it makes so much sense to me that Death Stranding and Prey are right next to each other for that, that reason, because it's like they feel very similar to me in that regard, where it's kind of like part of enjoying that game is you need to kind of like enjoy it on its level, like that. Like for instance, like I've tried to play Elden Ring a couple times and I bounce off it every time because the game it wants me to be playing. Just isn't something that I really enjoy that much, and it's like I think that to me is such a great example of like I know some people who love that game because that was exactly the game they wanted to be playing, and for me I was just like that doesn't do anything for me.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Yeah, I was one of the lucky people. Like it's my favorite game of all time. I was luckily one of the people that and I'd never played Dark Souls. I hadn't played Bloodborne. Like I went in just because. I was fed up with people talking about it. I was like, all right, I'll have a look. And then I fell in love with it.
No, I mean, and I think it's the thing is like, I think that game obviously wanted to capture that feeling of playing like Super Mario World 3 and finding a secret and, having that, having that joy. And so like it's funny that the one I keep meaning to play, but I keep worrying I'm going to be terrible at it is Tunic because I kind of hear and I feel like that's got that same sort of joy of exploration and finding secrets. And
yeah, so that's another game I love as well.
Yeah, I could literally ask you about every game on here, Eric.
Yeah, the Dig. I think maybe one under BioShock 2 I could live with, so it'd be 25 on the list.
That makes sense to me.
Yeah, I mean that seems okay to me. I mean, it's definitely the game is higher than I imagined. When we went in, I was like, oh my god, I'm going to hate this, and then I ended up actually really liking just like the vibe and kind of getting on board with it. So it's definitely, I was like, this is going to be bottom level when I was looking at like when I didn't know how to click on anything. I was like, oh my god. But
I disliked the puzzles more than I thought I would. But I liked the story and the world, the environment. I loved a lot more. Like I loved it, and I wasn't expecting that because obviously when I played it as a kid, I just don't think I appreciated any of that stuff. Like that, my memory wasn't. Oh, it's beautiful. My memory was like it's so funny. It's the when you like would change locations, like the loading screen it had like a little compass or something. And when I played it back in the day, like that would be on the screen for ages. But on here, I was playing it on my new MacBook, and it just flashed up for a second, and I was like, oh, I remember that symbol, but like I didn't even really have time to see it this time. But like that's one of my standout memories was the loading screen.
That's hilarious. Just activating that dopamine hit of nostalgia.
Yeah. I think that's it then. I think 25.
No debate needed. I'm surprised considering how crazy of a game it is. I thought that might be one where people are on different levels, but looks like it's got its perfect place, number 25 in the list. So one under BioShock 2, one above Ratchet & Clank, the 2016 remake.
And now our invert option joke works again because it is actually above. No, our joke has now been rebuilt and reworks.
Excellent.
We also, the reason there's a lily pad, in case you're wondering, Eric, is because we have two games that the protagonist is a frog.
Oh, we're both frog.
Next to each other, so we thought we'd add in a little lily pad for them.
The frog pond.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Right then, so that's us kind of done for our conversations on the Dig. This is your last orders for anything else that you want to say about it, Eric, before we go.
No, I think we've talked a lot about the Dig, probably more than anyone else is.
Actually, for that earlier, this is probably one of the most in-depth conversations on the internet. I mean, I did look up on YouTube if there was, any kind of other people talking about it, and there were a few, but not like you get a lot of things that aren't the video game The Dig when you search The Dig into YouTube. So I guess Ollie. Oh, sorry, Eric.
Oh no, I was going to say, for anyone else that's interested in learning, that's hearing this and wants to know more about it, the website Mixn Mojo, Mixnmojo, is a site dedicated to LucasArts adventure games, and they did an amazing like oral history write up on this game a couple years back, and it includes a lot of like interviews and things from during the development. It has a lot of things, like news articles from the time, and it's a really fun peek back into kind of what was games journalism and kind of like games media like at the time.
Awesome. I guess we'll link that. We can link that in the description in the show notes. Shall I read out what's coming up?
Yeah, and Eric, if you have any comments about any of the games we got coming up that you want to mention as we go here.
Yeah, sounds good.
We're gonna have you here as long as we can. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay, so the next episode is a game called Subterra, which is a board game that's coming out on April 21st. Have you heard of that one, Eric?
I've heard of it, but I don't really know much about it.
Okay, it's actually about digging, so maybe you'll like it. I don't know. And then after that, on May the 5th, we've got Hollow Knight. And then May the 19th, we've got Super Metroid. And the last one we've announced on June 2nd is Redfall, the new Arcane game.
Oh, yeah. Nice.
Cool. Awesome. So we'll leave that there. I will say that we are getting really close to the reason we've not announced the next one. We do have a standing game we might be doing, but we're going to hold off because on Patreon we're super close to a goal where it will be the first. We're going to have a big user vote and kind of like a little mini tournament to decide a game. And we're really close. We're hoping that that's the slot we're going to leave open for if we end up reaching that. So there'll be a link down below if you want to find out more about that.
Yeah. Cool. I think that is probably everything for now. Thanks so much, Eric, for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This was so much fun, you guys.
Tell your friends, get all your mates to come on. They can talk about whatever game they want, and we have to finish it, so we have to suffer through it. So,
if you guys want recommendations, poor Joe will have to be subjected to my DMs of people being like, here's who you should get this person.
Yeah, I mean that's what we love. Obviously, you're our first person from the industry, and it's kind of cool getting that perspective. You kind of talked about kind of the other side. We only talk about kind of consuming these things, and you kind of really shone a light on this stuff. So yeah, we really appreciate it. It's been great. Well, this was super fun. Thanks so much, you guys.
Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you also to everyone who's been watching or listening. There'll be a new one in 2 weeks from now doing Subterra, the board game. So yeah, look forward to that. But apart from that, cheers for watching, and we'll see you all later. Bye.
Cheers, bye.
Bye.